Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm the fill-in to Chairman Fleming gets here. We've got about 4 people left over to testify from yesterday, so we're going to go ahead and start that process now. April Albright. Is April Albright here?
Yes, I'm in virtual.
She's on Zoom. Ms. Albright?
Yes,
Yes. If you would, glad to have you with us today.
thank you.
If you could, we're going to probably try to limit comments as if you could just get to the point, because everything has been fairly well hashed out, but we'd love to hear your comments.
Okay, great, thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is April England Albright, and I am the legal director of Black Voters Matter Fund, which is a fund created to build capacity and electoral power in Black and marginalized communities. And Georgia is one of the states in which we work. What we at Black Voters Matter Fund know for sure is that Black voters, like all voters, desire to elect representatives and pass ballot initiatives that seek to provide security and resources to their communities. What Black Voters Matter Fund also knows for sure is that in the state of Georgia, the desire of Black voters to utilize voting to bring change and resources is often met with unparalleled force from the state, often making it very difficult and out of reach through the use of voter suppression tactics like those described by some courts that target African Americans with surgical precision. With that in mind, we unfortunately knew for sure that bills like HB 531 seeking to enshrine voter suppression would come this legislative session. Not because they were justified, because as shown in court after court, both state and federal in Georgia, there was no evidence of mass voter fraud. In fact, just yesterday, the US Supreme Court rejected another case in Georgia challenging the election results. Yet despite the continued rejection of the big lie of voter fraud from courts and no evidence of mass voter fraud shown in the Georgia legislative hearings in December, we, a broad coalition of civil rights organizations and individuals, find ourselves here having to stop this body from building a wall around the electoral process. If this body were legitimately attempting to resolve issues with Georgia's under-resourced voting infrastructure, you would be proposing bills that deal with shortage of polling locations, polling staff, ending intimidation of poll workers, and investment in more ballot drop boxes and more technology to expand access to voters in the state. After all, instead of there being a potential of these problems, these types of problems are well documented in the 2018 through 2020 election cycles. But none of these bills address these issues. But let's be clear why. Because the why is just as important as highlighting the fact that these bills are unjustified. In 2020, Black and other marginalized voters supported each other by providing water and food to those facing long lines and used early voting, ballot drop-off boxes, and no excuse mail-in voting that has existed in this state without objection since 2005. They did so safely, and because of their persistence, Georgia elected a Democratic president for the first time in 30 years and changed the balance of power in the United States Senate. And while we should be celebrating the fact that the voting participation increased and went well during the pandemic, Republicans are not. And that's why we're really here. In closing, Black Voters Matter Fund requested H. Bill 531 be voted down in this committee. If this bill is taken out, it will become a part of the long history of voter suppression tactics that are used to disproportionately make it hard for Black and marginalized voters in Georgia to vote, as demonstrated by the testimony of many on yesterday. So Black Voters Matter is asking this committee to do the right and principled thing. But to do so, you will first have to tell the folks in your communities that the problems highlighted in this bill don't actually exist. And 2, you have to fundamentally believe, not just in theory, that everyone in this state, even those that are Black, brown, indigenous, Asian American, or Pacific Islanders, also have this right to share in power and create policy in this state. And depending on your actions with this bill, HB 531, and other similar bills being proposed, we will know the answer to that fundamental question. So we're just asking you, Black Voters Matter Fund, to vote this bill down. And that's my comments.
Thank you so much. Do we have any questions from any of the committee members? No? Thank you so much. We appreciate your time. Next up, Fee Wynn.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Ms. Wynn.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, Representative Powell and members of the committee. Thank you, first of all, for the opportunity to be heard today on House Bill 531. My name is Fee Nguyen, and I'm the Litigation Director of Asian Americans Advancing Justice Atlanta. Advancing Justice Atlanta is a nonprofit legal advocacy organization dedicated to protecting the civil rights of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in Georgia, including, of course, the sacred right to vote. Advancing Justice Atlanta has run an election protection program in Georgia for the last 6 years, and our program encompasses a voter hotline in multiple languages, as well as poll monitoring at several polling places across Gwinnett County, Fulton County, DeKalb County, Cobb County, and Forsyth County. We at Advancing Justice Atlanta have many concerns about House Bill 531, many of which have already been expressed by other members of the public over the last few days. I do not wish to go over all of the same ground again, but I would like to call your attention to a section of the bill that is of particular concern to us and that I think should be of particular concern to this committee, because it very directly threatens to disenfranchise thousands of Georgia voters. And as one witness said yesterday, it represents a vast departure from current Georgia law. And the section of the bill that I'm referring to is Section 20. Section 20 proposes to completely throw out votes that are 100% valid under current law. Under current Georgia law, provisional ballots that are cast out of precinct but in the right county are counted as long as the voter is determined to be a legitimate eligible voter. What this means is that if a voter goes to their regular polling place on election day, only to discover that their polling place has been changed at the last minute, that voter has the option to vote provisionally where they are and have their vote automatically counted as long as they're determined to be a legitimate voter. This is a critical fail-safe for voters who, for any number of reasons, may wind up at the wrong precinct on election day, including that they weren't timely or sufficiently notified of a change in their polling place. That happens all the time. And I think that we saw an increase in that happening during the pandemic because of the number of polling places that weren't at the last minute able to serve in that capacity. HB 531 proposes to completely eliminate that fail-safe, that critical stopgap. And we don't have to guess what the effect of this change in the law would be. In the November 2020 election, we know from data available on the Secretary of State's website that there were at least 6,306 legitimate voters who voted out of precinct but in the right county. Testimonies yesterday from another gentleman suggested that there are actually more than that, but those are the numbers that I have available from the Secretary of State's website. HB 531 would wipe out all 6,306 of those votes, no questions asked. When the effect of a law would be to immediately disenfranchise over 6,000 votes in one election, that law merits the utmost scrutiny from this body. When the effect of a law would be to disenfranchise over 6,000 voters, it is incumbent upon every member of this body to be very clear about what purpose that law serves and to think long and hard on whether there's any purpose that could possibly justify such plain, clear-cut, and direct disenfranchisement of thousands of Georgia voters. The other thing that I would urge this body to consider is how this provision would be implemented at the polls. And on this point, I would like to share with you what we observe time and time again when we do election protection. Year after year, election after election, we witness hardworking, well-intentioned poll workers give voters the wrong information. And most relevant to our discussion here today, we've seen poll workers tell voters that they can vote out of county and that their vote will still be counted. But we know that that's not true under current Georgia law. But what ends up happening is that those voters are completely disenfranchised because they reasonably relied on misinformation given to them by a poll worker. And there's absolutely no recourse for those voters. If HB 531 changes the way that out of precinct but in county provisional ballots are treated, then there's a very real and significant risk of even more confusion, more misinformation, and more disenfranchisement. And this type of confusing change poses a specific threat to voters from immigrant communities that we serve, who are more likely to face language barriers or be newer to the voting process. For example, in the November 2020 election, more than 40,000 voters, Asian American voters, voted for the first time. And what we also know is that 44% of Asian American voters in Georgia are limited English proficient. So these voters who may be new to the process and who struggle with English are less likely to be adequately apprised of and informed about this proposed change in the law, and are thus much more likely to cast provisional ballots without knowing that they won't be counted, and they will have no recourse for that. This is especially true because elections in Georgia are conducted nearly entirely in English. And the last thing I would want to say about that is new or first-time voters are also more likely to give up when faced with additional hoops or barriers to voting, which this provision, which HB 531 and this specific provision would put in place. So in closing, I would urge this committee to vote no on HB 531, especially if Section 20 or any provision that would unjustifiably eliminate provisional votes that are valid under current law remains in the bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Let's see if we have any questions. Do we have any questions of Ms. Nguyen from the committee? Ms. Nguyen, thank you so very much. We appreciate your comments.
Thank you.
Is Ms. Albright still with us? We've had a question from one of the committee members. Ms. Albright? Chairman Blackman had a question, and if she comes back on at some point, then. All right, thank you so much. Ms. Dennis.
Good afternoon, committee members, and thank you, Representative Powell. I am not going to make my what I wrote down very long because Fee really hit on the nail. What I want to talk about was Section 20, the eliminating provisional ballots that are out of precinct. With Common Cause Georgia, I am the executive director, and we help run the grassroots field program in conjunction with the other coalition members, a part of election protection. And we see time and time again that there are many people who are voting provisionally. With Common Cause Georgia, we have asked that the state extend the provisions for provisional ballots and emergency paper ballots to be at precincts during the election time. HB 531 stands to increase the numbers of folks who will be voting provisionally and folks who will be waiting in long lines on election day. So we're really urging the committee to vote down HB 531 and also put in provisions for extra emergency paper ballots during the early voting times if you all intend on limiting early voting hours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do we have any questions? Ms. Dennis? I see no questions. Thank you so much. Mrs. Briggs?
Good afternoon. Are you referring to Linda Bridges?
Bridges, I'm sorry.
That's quite all right. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Linda Bridges. I'm the Executive Director of the League of Women Voters of Georgia. I am testifying today on behalf of the League and will be reading a statement from the League of Women Voters of Georgia's President, Susanna Scott, who cannot be here due to a work conflict. The League is a nonpartisan political organization that has worked for the last 101 years to ensure that every person has a desire, the right, the knowledge, and the confidence to participate in our democracy. The League's local organization and members are dedicated to our mission of empowering voters and defending democracy through our voter registration drives, candidate forums, our vote411.org voter guide, get out the vote efforts to include riding the polls and lines, warming, poll watching, and service as vote reveals panelists. Changes in the election laws that make it more difficult for voters to exercise their franchise or for volunteers to assist citizens in registering to vote and casting their ballots will have a profound impact, sir, on the work that the League, through our members and volunteers, do. The legislative process surrounding this bill has been problematic. The original 48-page bill was only available through posting on social media hours before members of this committee had a hearing at 3 p.m. on the 17th of February. Then less than 24 hours later, the committee held a hearing before all its members at 9:30 a.m. on the 18th of February. Before that hearing, this committee indicated public testimony via remote means, including Zoom, would not be available. Yet Chair Fleming invited witnesses to testify via Zoom during that hearing. Only in response to a question during the hearing did Chair Fleming indicate for the first time that remote public testimony would be available, but only if community members were invited by committee members or reached out to the committee staff. As Susanna Scott, she's the primary caregiver for her 80-year-old mother. She's unable to attend the hearings. Of course, it was Friday, to speak on behalf of the League. While Susanna was heartened to see the League's partner organization testify in person on Friday, it is important to make clear that the League's opposition to the bill and the initial time frame and access provided was not amicable to those like Susanna, the League, who are unable to come in person due to health concerns caused by the pandemic. Equally pragmatic, this committee introduced a substitute bill for House Bill 531 at some point later Friday and over the weekend, which was 59 pages. Again, this version of House Bill 531 was not available over the weekend on this committee's website. Instead, community members only learned of the substitute bill through social media. For these reasons, we also request a committee that does not vote on HB. We're asking that the committee does not vote on the HB 531 until at least the middle end of this week. Of course, we're into the February 22nd this week. This bill creates serious challenges for voters and makes significant changes to the election process. Rushing this bill through without adequate time for review, reflection, or input is a disservice to Georgia voters and Georgia's election officers around the state. For these reasons, we, Susanna Scott, President, and the League of Women Voters, urge the members of this committee to reject House Bill 531. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Bridges. Do we have any questions from any of the committee members? Chairman Martin.
Ms. Bridges, can you hear me?
Absolutely, yes, sir.
Yes, ma'am. I just wanted to thank you for articulating a couple things and giving me the opportunity to sound this. I wasn't here for the entire meeting on Friday as I had to chair a higher ed committee across the way. But I wanted to articulate for those that are listening and people here today, the reason we ask people to call in to testify, call staff to testify via Zoom is you've probably done this a great deal during the pandemic. If you open up a Zoom link to the general public, that is subject to being hijacked by who knows what, and variety of things pop up on the Zoom call. So it's not in any way, shape, or form trying to tamp down or dampen folks' ability to connect. But the reason you're asked to call is the Zoom link so that you can get in and communicate with this committee or any other committee in the House and Senate during these times is so that we can open that up for the specific folks and recognize you and not have it out where somebody would do mischief calling into the committee or another one, because that has been hijacked. I'm sure you've heard a bit about that with some of the early attempts to do online education. So thanks for allowing me to point that out relative to this committee, and I think others, Chairman Powell.
Thank you, Chairman Martin. Do we have any questions from any of the committee members for Ms. Bridges? Ms. Bridges, thank you so much for your comments.
Thank you, and thank you, Chairman Chuck Martin, for that clarification.
All right, Laura Walker.
Hello, thank you, Representative Powell, and hello to everyone there at the State House and listening in. My name is Laura Walker, and I live in Columbus, Georgia, in Muskogee County, and I served 2 years as the chair of the local Democratic Committee, 2019 and 2020, in which I participated in a lot of elections office meetings, board meetings at the state level, at the county level, also helped with the audits and the recounts that were triggered by our general election. And so I'm testifying today just on behalf or as a private citizen here and a voting rights activist in Muskogee County. HB 531 is a direct attack on counties like mine, like Muskogee County, which have worked hard to make voting accessible to all of our diverse electorate. Muskogee County received a $412,000 grant from the Center for Tech and Civic Life and a $210,675 grant from the California Schwarzenegger Institute for State and Global Policy. And with that money, Muskogee County Elections Office was able to open more early vote locations and open them earlier in the season, support our hardworking heroes of democracy, which are our poll workers, by providing hazard pay, purchase secure storage for absentee ballots, and also purchase a high-speed ballot opening machine. In total, the County Elections Department received $622,675 in grant funding, which represented 69% of its entire operating budget. As Nancy Boren, Muskogee County's Director of Elections and Registration, said, "I thought the CTCL grant would be a great opportunity for us here in the city to be able to do what we need to do, to be able to help voters and to be able to help our staff and recognize the importance of the voting process." Muskogee County offered both Saturday and Sunday early voting during both weekends during the general election, allowing Muskogee residents more opportunities to access the vote. In Georgia, almost 10% of voters voted during the weekend, but in Muskogee County, that number was 16%. Many of the provisions in HB 531 would levy considerable costs and burdens onto our county by, number one, forcing us to create new processes for repetitive ID requirements. Number two, hire more staff. Number three, hire security personnel. Number four, create longer lines from early vote restrictions because of early vote restrictions. And number five, process and issue ballots under substantially reduced timelines, all in order to prevent widespread voter fraud that does not exist, which was proven by our audits and recounts and many investigations. For example, requiring photo ID and extra documentation for absentee ballot voting necessitates extra costs to properly store these applications and additional training to poll workers to keep this information secure. Additionally, HB 531 would waste money that has already been spent by our county. Muskogee County spent $15,000 on drop boxes that were securely bolted into the concrete. They were hugely popular with our voters. If drop boxes are eliminated, that money was wasted. Furthermore, these fiscal hits would be thrown at Muskogee County during a historically uncertain budgetary cycle. To close, HB 31 would restrict Muskogee County's ability to deliver to its citizens and offer robust opportunities for voting by restricting how we fund our elections, both regarding the ability or inability to apply for grant money and how we fund our elections, because possibly we would have a funding shortfall due to a lot of unfunded mandates that seem to be included here. And then how we run our elections by restricting the number of weekend voting hours that we decide to offer to Muskogee County voters. These potential mandates make voting less secure and less accessible, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. I respectfully request that leadership allow the Office of Planning and Budget and the Department of Audits and Accounts to provide fiscal notes for these bills so that our elected officials can make fact-based decisions about a cornerstone of our democracy. Thank you very much.
We sure do. Thank you. And you have a couple of questions, Ms. Brunel.
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you for all the work that you did in your county for the elections. One question I want to ask you was that if you did not have that grant money, what would your election season look like during the past election?
And let me preface this by saying that I definitely worked with our elections, and I did also speak with Mrs. Boren this morning, just chatting with her about this whole, kind of her over her site, what she sees. Definitely, we would have had to have had fewer drop boxes, fewer. In fact, I believe that initially there were only 3 early vote locations. But when we found out about the funding that are the grants that we received, we were able to open 2 more. And we were also able to open them to add fewer days on the front end so we could have earlier early voting. So that also we would have had to find funding, I guess, because we definitely needed to have a secure way to store the huge increase in absentee ballots that we had. And so using that money, we were able to be confident that we had those very needing to be secured ballots taken care of and secured. So those are just a couple of ways in which I think we were able to use that money and how it would have looked if we hadn't had it.
Can I ask one more question?
Sure.
Do you have an estimate of how much money other counties received from independent sources?
I do not have that information, with the exception for one county. I just have a little bit of information here about Cherokee County. We know that many other counties did have to rely on outside funding, and that 43 counties received private grants to conduct elections. Cherokee County, which is one of our smaller counties, received $765,000. So yeah, if we take Cherokee as a rough estimate, that's close to $33 million statewide to support election administration across 43 counties. And those are services that would have been unfunded otherwise. So these grants, the opportunity to do the work, to actually put in the hours and do the work to get money to supplement and enhance and improve our elections in different counties, that should not be penalized. It's free to anyone who is able to apply. And so I don't understand why that would be taken away.
Representative Alexander.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Walker, Are you familiar with the Voting Rights Lab, the analysis that was performed on the counties?
Yes, ma'am, I am.
This analysis by Voting Rights Lab estimates that this bill will cost the state and the counties $57 million. Can you shed some light on other costs associated with this bill if you've had an opportunity to look through? I know there's some watermark paper that is going to be required. So can you just shed some light on some other costs associated with this bill?
Absolutely. We need further research, preferably through a legislative fiscal note, to provide guidance on how much these changes may affect the costs of elections. Basically, by the influx of in-person voting, if absentee ballots are curtailed. And then also how much it would cost for ballot security or ballot request security that will be needed to protect voter information. And then finally, how much litigation could cost Georgia. Those are all not necessarily researched, and we expect that a lot of voters would opt to vote in person due to the security risk of attaching a photo ID and sending it through the mail. We don't know the impact of hiring more poll workers and the inevitably longer lines, since we're making it harder for voters to vote by mail. In that same vein, the bill provides no guidelines on how to keep absentee ballot applications secure, since they will contain sensitive information. And as a result, we have no way of estimating that cost. We really need a fiscal note that can let us know how much this dangerous provision will cost voters, because ultimately that's who's going to pay higher taxes to pay for this. And a large but unknown line item is how much any litigation will cost. Laws mirroring HB 531 enacted in other states have resulted in massive attorney fees for the state. A North Carolina law with very similar provisions, including elimination of Sunday voting, banning out of precinct provisional voting, and increased photo identification requirements, was struck down as racially discriminatory in 2016. North Carolina was ordered to pay about $6 million in the plaintiff's attorney fees on top of their own. Texas had to pay close to $7 million in plaintiff's attorney's fees this past year. So by passing HB 531, Georgia could expose itself to $12 million in court costs. For example, $6 million for our own defense and another $6 million if the state loses. So we really need more attention on what these mandates will actually cost before we can responsibly vote.
Thank you for your answer.
You're welcome.
Dean Smyrie.
Ms. Walker, I just wanted to say thank you for your testimony. It's good to see you, and appreciate you calling in today. Thank you.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Chairman Martin.
Again, thank you for calling. A couple of things, just wanted to spread again. This bill does not call for you sending a photo ID. You've mentioned that several times. Just to be clear, the 531 does not call for you to send a photo ID, a copy of a photo ID. You are aware of that, right?
Isn't it either your ID number? But I did think that there was the that was a possibility to send a copy of your photo ID with, could have a social security number, a driver's license number, et cetera.
Or you could write the number on. The point is, it's not, if you write your driver's license, you're not required to keep a photo ID. I just wanted to make sure. We had some people testify yesterday that were reading Senate bills and not this bill. You mentioned the security, what piqued my interest here a bit. You mentioned the security for absentee ballot applications. I'm a bit confused and confronted by the fact that you don't keep those secure now.
No, they are, but because there's enhanced, because you could possibly have your driver's license number or other PPI, in these applications. That's a little bit of a higher level of security that would be needed for what is needed now.
educate me, because I'm not familiar, other than the information that currently goes on an application and your driver's license number, which everyone has to hand when they go to vote absentee in person. What other PPI do you see required in this bill?
Well, that's enough. Just that driver's license number. That's not something that everyone, I mean, you can hand that individually to someone when you go to vote in person, but having people knowing, there are a lot of people who look for opportunities to steal that information, knowing that it would be written in an absentee ballot application with a very identifiable envelope. That would definitely need a little bit of a higher level of protection than just your normal name, address, phone number, email address, etc. That is on a
But
normal.
again, I'm going back, and I do want to press this point. It's important to me if I choose to vote in person, but it's important to me if I'm in Muskogee County and I send you my absentee ballot request and or return that ballot, that you keep that secure. The fact that it now has one more piece of information, I mean, I want it secure to start with, not more secure since it has my driver's license number on it. So I guess my question, and belabor the point, is I would hope you wouldn't have to beef up security too much, because I would hope it would be absolutely secure today if people from Muskogee County sent in their absentee ballot request. I would hope that would be secure today, and you wouldn't have to improve security any further. Secure is secure.
As you know, and I'm sure you are probably well familiar with Nancy Boren, our elections administrator. She runs the highest level elections here in the state. There's probably no doubt about that. One of the things that we actually purchased, or that they purchased with some of the grant money, was lockable filing cabinets and bins, just to kind of renew their supply for what they would normally do to keep their ballots and applications secure. However, really must stress that having possibly social security numbers or driver's license numbers, that is more, people can steal identities, people can, using that information. So that is secure, and we think that there would be an added level of security if that was a requirement.
Martin, where are you?
We're finished, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, there you are. Okay. I just want to make sure. I couldn't see where you were. Okay. Any further questions? Mr. Chairman Powell.
Yeah. Thank you, ma'am. I would like to ask you a question. You had spoke about the private donations and private grants and all that came from either corporate or political America to your county. And I know they went to certain counties, but not. One of the concerns that I've had, and that's about uniformity among all 159 counties. And my question is that I heard what you had said about that volume of money, and I'm very familiar with how that might could have influenced poll workers and such like that, just the sheer fact that it was this extra money that came in over the normal government process of Muskogee County. But do you not think that it should be a fair way for the distribution of that money to other counties, so that all counties should be treated fair and equally in the distribution of any newfound money or donations?
Well, let me first say that I'm not an employer or employee of the elections office. However, I do know that those grants are available for anyone to apply for. It's not, I believe that that's the case. So to me, that is fair and open to everyone who wishes to apply for it. You just have to, do the work and fulfill the requirements. So, it's open to everyone, equal opportunity.
But my next question would be, is who approves those grants? How do we know that those in certain counties would not just be systematically disapproved as opposed to other counties that this corporate money might think that they could influence.
I don't know. I think that, for example, the one grant from the California Schwarzenegger Institute, he's a Republican. I don't know what you're kind of insinuating there, or if that was part of it, but it's these things are open to everybody. I don't understand, if people wanted to apply, if counties could take the time to apply, they certainly could do, just the same as many counties did here in Georgia. So, adding unfunded mandates in this bill potentially would be an even heavier burden. So, I believe that even Muskogee County was applauded for these, for finding the money and being able to offer its, county voters this, add additional service, more days than they would have normally budgeted for. So, I don't know though about how these, the Center for Tech and Civic Life and the California Schwarzenegger Institute for State and Global Policy makes their decisions.
Thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome.
Representative Burnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Didn't the Secretary of State offer grants too, and you all had to apply for them?
I'm sorry, is that question for me?
Yes, ma'am.
I don't know about that. I don't have any knowledge about whether he did or not.
Okay, because it was my understanding that they offered grants to you all so that you could apply to buy personal protection equipment from them.
Was that the Center for Tech and Civic Life grant? I'm not sure, but.
Okay, I don't know the name of it, but I know that, well, there's a representative here from Secretary of State, but I know that they talked about the fact that for the elections that they would be providing additional funds for you all. And we did have one of our speakers that spoke either Friday or yesterday, I can't remember which day. He was from a county and and he said that he decided he did not want to apply for the money. So you are right that if a county wanted to apply, all counties had the same option to apply for the money. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Representative Alexander.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I have a list here of some of the counties that did receive some of the funding, because we're talking about Muskogee County, but Carroll County received 104,000, Fulton received 10 million, Madison received 14,000, Paulding County, which is my district, received a total of 360,000. Douglas, which is my county, received 1.6 million. Clayton received 3.8. Henry County received 487,793. So I guess for me, the money was utilized for the various of things that Ms. Walker just spoke about. For my concern is, how do we plan to help counties offset any funds that they no longer have available?
I would agree. And this year we had COVID to contend with. So the budgets that were initially put in were then having to be stretched even further because of, needing bigger places so that you could space everybody properly when they came in to vote, and hiring more poll workers possibly. So yeah, funding is a huge part of why I am so worried about HB 531.
All right, ma'am, we appreciate you being with us today.
Thank you very much.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on 1 second. Did someone else
Okay.
over here? Mr. Williams, hold on 1 second. Try now, Representative Williams.
Number 12. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, ma'am. Were these grants available before COVID? Do you know? or did they just come available this past election cycle?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm sorry that I don't know.
I was chief registrar in Baldwin County for 16 years. I never knew of any grants. We were never offered anything. I know Baldwin County didn't get anything. You were talking about the absentee ballot applications being sent in. Are you aware of any other way that absentee ballot applications are sent into the Board of Elections?
No, I'm not.
Do you know if they're emailed in or faxed in?
Oh, yes, I know that I emailed mine in for the primary. So when I requested an absentee ballot, I was able to email it in. Took a picture of it and emailed the photo of it.
Are you aware of some people in some counties going back and picking up the absentee ballot applications and delivering them for the people to the board? Harvest.
No.
You ever heard of harvesting?
I have heard of it.
Yes,
I've
ma'am.
heard people talk about it like in the news or on Twitter and that kind of thing.
Yes,
But
ma'am.
I don't know of it personally.
I do. I know it happens. Actually, one candidate in a county told someone here at the Capitol that they were doing that. And the person told the candidate, that's illegal. You can't do that. You're actually handling other people's ballots.
Mm-hmm.
So there are things that go on out there that people somehow don't believe happens, or they wish to not believe happen, or they won't acknowledge that it happens, that we're trying to get to the bottom of. So thank you very much for your testimony, and thank you for your answers.
You're welcome. And just to go back quickly to your question about whether these grants were available before, this is just my thought, but I'm kind of thinking that maybe these things opened up because of COVID, because people were having to fund things that they never expected to fund. So that is possible. I don't know that for sure, though.
Well, maybe so. And maybe the Secretary of State can just apply for the state of Georgia and get the money and put it all over the state like it needs to be and help
That'd be very helpful, I'm sure.
rather than go to just certain counties.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, ma'am. We appreciate you being with us today. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, hold on.
Oh.
Is that Ms. Burnow? Yes, ma'am.
I think what will help is if we could have a fiscal note for all these changes for 531. And then that way we know that everybody in the state would receive equal funding. So if we're going to mandate these changes, we're going to have a fiscal note to make sure that we have enough money for them. Thank you.
Thank you for reiterating that point. That's perfect.
And this time we can say goodbye.
Okay.
Thank you for being with us today.
You're welcome.
Okay, next we have Miss Marilyn Marks via Zoom. Miss Marks, can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, we sure can.
All right.
Glad to have you with us today, and we'd like to hear from you, and we'd ask you to keep it to about 3 to 5 minutes, please.
All right, I will. Thank you very much, Chairman Fleming and members of the committee, for giving me the opportunity to speak on HB 531. My name is Marilyn Marks. I'm the Executive Director of the Coalition for Good Governance. I've spent my last 12 years working in the field of election security, and frequently that has been in troubled elections. Coalition for Good Governance is a small, nonprofit, nonpartisan organization primarily focused on election security, voter privacy, and election transparency. We've spent much of the time that we have in the field with our observers, who are primarily volunteers. I had prepared a map to show you of the many Georgia counties where our volunteers spend their time. They're very knowledgeable monitors and poll watchers that have been working in the field for 2 years. But given the shortage of time, just imagine a Georgia map with lots of red dots representing us. The committee members should also have a multicolored handout from me that I believe is a legal sheet of paper. Can you confirm, Mr. Chairman, whether or not You all have that handout. I believe your staff was going to give that to the
Yeah.
committee members.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. Thank you so very much. We understand that the sponsor's motivation for this bill seemed to be concerns about election security in 2020, and that you've heard a lot from voters and members of the General Assembly about election security. And as I said, most of our work is in the election security area. And from our perspective of HB 531 seriously degrades election security and loosens controls, which is antithetical to, I think, the goals that the sponsors of the bill had in increasing security. Now, we at Coalition for Good Governance have never been big fans of massive mail ballot programs. And because many times mail ballots have just not been as tightly controlled as they actually should be. However, since the ballot marking devices in the polling places were installed, we've actually promoted mail balloting, not because we like it or because we think that they are secure as they are now used in Georgia, but because they are more secure than the hackable, unauditable ballot marking devices. So if you look at the colored handout, what we're trying to do there is signify that while current security practices can be improved, 531 actually degrades the very security that you are concerned about. There are measures that we would recommend that would make mail ballots more secure, but HB 531 makes mail ballots less secure. For example, it degrades the standard that is used by almost all states in verifying that you have the correct voter identity when through an individualized signature. That signature is hard to steal or replicate. And that's why it is the best security when a voter is turning in a mail ballot. However, when you use a driver's license number, that is going to invite fraud both on the county and on the voter, as it will subject the voter to the risk of identity theft. It's easy to buy list of driver's license numbers that can be used to apply for mail ballots. And then the wrong person actually gets ballots, which they can then use the driver's license number to turn in. So we urge some serious caution before going down this road that is likely to increase fraud when you are looking to decrease what small amount there is. If there's a similar program as to what's being recommended here, that's in another state that actually works, then the General Assembly should study that program, but in the meantime, should back off from any idea of using driver's licenses for identification. We're also concerned about the degradation of public oversight and the oversight conducted by the political parties. In mail ballot processing, which needs to be more transparent, and I think that's what you've heard from your political parties, with the parties taking an active part and seeing to it that only eligible ballots are accepted and that improper ballots are rejected. Unfortunately, the provisions of this bill put a gag order on your party poll watchers. Any party poll watcher that finds a problem with mail ballots, they're not permitted to report back to the candidate or the party. They must remain silent or only talk to the election director. These provisions are going to frustrate your parties even more. We're also concerned about the push for early scanning of ballots. Georgia has had it right all along in its traditional law, mandating that wait until very near election day to scan the ballots. You've heard claims that are misrepresented that tabulation will not occur until election day. That's not true. Scanning is tabulation. Scanning is tabulation. The scanners are recording votes in a manner that—
Ms. Marks, you're at the 5-minute mark, but we will
Okay.
give you a chance to wrap up.
Okay, well, we're just, we are dismayed by how much of a mismatch there is between the provisions of the bill and the stated goals. And we would ask you to take time, study the research, find out what other states are doing, and then defer this bill until further study and factual research can be done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. We appreciate you being with us today. Okay. Next, we have Ms. Fleming. Ms. Fleming, Committee members, we have now gone through the list of everyone that a committee member asked to speak and everyone that signed up yesterday before we ended and had to come back to them. So the chair's intent now is to do what we've done over the past couple of days. And that is, as you know, yesterday I explained to you that you would be receiving a committee substitute, LC 28024-2S, which was emailed to you last night, and the copy you should have in front of you. And I mentioned to you yesterday the changes that would be in there, and I'm going to go over those again with you, and then we'll talk about where we go from there. So if you look at Section 10 of the bill, Section 10 of the LC number that I just read to you has in there the security paper that I mentioned to you yesterday, the requirement for security paper per ballots, so that there would actually be special paper used for our balloting, that we could tell if it was ours or if some other paper was attempted to be used. Section 11, the next section, that is where I mentioned to you in our effort to have greater transparency with the public about the testing of our voting machines. We were adding there the already new requirements for larger ads and more publication through various websites. We would now require each Board of Election to send to the Secretary of State their announcement of when their testing for public view would be, and the Secretary of State will post it on their website as well. If you will also, in Section 12, the next section, we mentioned to you that earlier in the bill, we had talked about the idea that if you are a third party and you're going to send absentee ballot applications, you had to have that clearly marked, whereby the potential voter would know that this was not a government document and you would clearly identify the group you were with. We added language to make sure that that disclaimer, so to speak, would be visible and not stuck in the corner somewhere. And that language you have in there comes from other FEC, Federal Election Commission requirements about font, not specifying font size, but saying it has to be very notable. The next thing that I mentioned to you yesterday that would be in the substitute that you have in front of you now is in Section 16, line 824. Already we had put into the substitute previously a bill by Representative Jenny Earhart. She had an issue in Cobb County where a early voting precinct was closed very close to the election, so close that it caused confusion. People were still showing up to vote there. Yeah, page 33, line 824. What we did is we modified that to a 14-day time period for early voting locations, that if you're going to close one, you have to give notice before that you're going to do it. That is that change. The last change that I mentioned to you yesterday and repeat to you again today is in Section 18 of the bill, page 44, lines 11-10. As I mentioned yesterday, we already had in the bill that for the first time we would require training for our poll watchers. We're certainly going to require the people that did the training to certify that they actually did the training for these folks, and that is in the bill. I'll be happy to try to answer any questions about any of those changes that we mentioned yesterday that I just went through again with you. Representative Burnell.
Yes, thank you. What section did you say this last one was in?
The last one,
Uh-huh,
18,
18, okay.
page 44, lines
Okay.
11-10.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Any other questions regarding any of those additions to the substitute that you have in front of you now? Okay. The next thing I would like to do is talk about potential additions to the bill, as we have done every day. I'm going to pass out to you a potential change that Representative Shaw Blackman has worked on, Chairman Shaw Blackman has worked on. And I'm going to, as soon as we get it passed out, allow him to explain that to you and answer any questions you have. It deals with a process that you will be familiar with. As you know, when an agency makes rules in our state, they have to notify the legislature of those new rules. And there is a chance for us to be aware of that. And this is going to deal with emergency rules regarding the State Board of Election and their requirement to do a similar notification. Chairman Shaw, what number are you? Chairman Shaw Blackman. 4. Why don't you go ahead and explain that new language to the committee?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the language from House Bill 491 that was reviewed in subcommittee this morning. We did make a small change, but again, a bipartisan bill that we were working towards to help with a little transparency and provide a little extra notice and check and balance with regard to emergency rules. So I think you explained it pretty thoroughly. It just instructs the state election board to provide notice similar in an emergency situation as they do in a non-emergency situation. So we changed line 12 to give notice to the public of its intended action and remove the 7-day limit because there are emergencies obviously that would need to happen within that time frame.
Any questions for Chairman Blackman regarding that bill that was heard in subcommittee this morning? There were 2 additional bills that Chairman Blackman heard in subcommittee this morning. I want him to talk to you about both of those and answer questions. Do you know the bill numbers off the top of your head, Chairman?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
House
It's
Bill,
your choice, whichever one you want to talk about first, but go ahead and tell the rest of the committee what your subcommittee heard this morning.
Okay. We also heard House Bill 492 and 493 and as well, I believe it was 501. But the ones that be speaking to you about are 492 and 493. On 492, there is a provision which again speaks to the checks and balances and some of the separation of powers I think that we see in other arenas and in other states. So it would actually move the Secretary of State out of the chairman's seat of the state election board, and that is replaced by an independent person that's appointed and then confirmed by 3/5 vote of the General Assembly. The Secretary of State would remain as an ex officio non-voting member of the board. And again, you would have the rulemaking body with some independence and separation from the person responsible or the team responsible for executing and enforcing the law and the rules. House Bill 493.
Hold on one second, Mr. Chairman. Let me see if there's any questions
Yes,
about
sir.
what you just described to the committee. Representative Burnell.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, it says an elector appointed by the governor. Is that correct? Because you just said somebody that was appointed by the legislator.
I said appointed and confirmed by the General Assembly. I'm
Okay.
sorry. Yes, it is appointed by the governor and confirmed by a 3/5 vote of the General Assembly.
All right, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Representative Smyre.
Chairman Blackman, is that the one, was that 501? The one with the authorization of the General Assembly, well, the governor appointing the person, and that person will be, once they appointed, then they will serve as chair of the state election board. Is that the one?
501 was actually the recount,
Okay.
the hand recount bill. This is the one that we talked about this morning, and it would be a 2-year term. would be an independent, somebody that, is not, active or contributing to any particular party, had not served in any office in the prior 2 years. So it would put an independent person in that chair position.
And could be removed. May I follow up, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
And could be removed
I'm sorry.
by the members of the General Assembly. Is that by two?
In accordance with current law, it could be removed as other members of that board are able to be removed.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions for Chairman Blackman regarding the House bill that he heard this morning in subcommittee? I know half of you should have been there, but I want the other half to have chances now to ask questions about it. Any further questions? Okay, Chairman Shaw, tell us about the other bill you heard in subcommittee this morning.
The House Bill 493 was the other companion bill. And we had probably the most discussion about this particular piece. It functions in a manner whereby if there's an investigative process and you've had the proper scrutiny and hearings by the state election board, that they are able to direct the Secretary of State, or they're able to go in themselves and assist and help advise, administer elections within a county. They're limited to 18 months for this particular time frame, and the intent is to get the training needed and get the county back in line and up to speed so that they can move back in and take over and run things. And I know that Mr. Edwards appeared with ACCG, and he had a couple of questions and a couple of things that he wanted to recommend. So we're, looking to hear from him along those lines. But again, it is a little different than I think maybe, some other versions of this particular bill, whereby there is an 18-month limit. There's a limit as to many counties that can be worked with at one time. And, the intention is to get that county back up to speed, help with what the problems are, and then turn it back over to the county for administration.
Representative Douglas.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I was sitting back here mulling on the last bill, and I wasn't privy to be in that subcommittee to hear the hearing for that bill, but help me understand this. You're taking the control away from the Secretary of State for elections, who runs statewide, to obtain that position and put somebody that we elect that doesn't have to run statewide over the elections. Am I hearing that correctly?
We put them in the chair of the board. So what I think might.
And just for sake of clarity, Chairman, Representative Douglas is asking not about the bill you just explained, but the one before that. So I just want to make sure the committee is tuned into that. Go ahead.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. There's a model by which in Kentucky that this was, brought to our attention. And what we see, I think, in other areas, departments, et cetera, like I served on the board for the Technical College System of Georgia. The commissioner did not serve on that board and certainly didn't chair it. So what you have a rulemaking body, which is a state elections board. And then you have a Secretary of State who is still the chief elections officer, but this would move them to an ex officio position. And then you would have an independent chairman of that board. So you go from what would be a partisan to a nonpartisan that would be in charge of rulemaking. And then the check and balance, is you have an executive that is executing and enforcing the law. And then you have another body which is actually making the law, much similar to we see, I think in other government agencies and other states, other government as we know it.
Okay, follow up. Mr. Chair, follow up.
Yes, go ahead.
So if everything goes awry, who's responsible?
Well, what do you mean if everything goes awry?
Well, the complaints, concerns, who do they go to? Do they still go to the Secretary of State? Or do they go
If
to
you have an
this-
enforcement issue, you would go to the Secretary of State. If you have a rule issue or a new rule that you'd like to make, you'd go to the State Election Board.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Representative Burnell? And which one do you want to ask about? Same one that Representative Douglas was asking about? Go ahead, just for clarity.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Chair. Chairman Blackman, I didn't ask this question this morning. I was there. How do you decide the person is nonpartisan if the governor is going to appoint the person?
Got turned off. If you look on, well, I don't know if you have a copy of the bill, but if you look at line 29, it says the chairperson of the board shall be nonpartisan. At no time during his or her service shall the chairperson actively participate in a political party, organization, or in the campaign of a candidate for public office, nor shall he or she make any campaign contributions to a candidate for public office, et cetera, et cetera. So that is intended to preserve what is nonpartisan.
Can I ask one more question?
Yes, ma'am.
If the Secretary of State, he or she is elected by our citizens. So are we taking their citizens' rights away by not allowing him to, for him to have be non-voting member of the board?
That's taking the right of the citizens, well as
Because he's there to represent the citizens if he's the person that runs the election. So is this going to take away our rights as we elect the Secretary of State? Because they're going to lose some power, even though they've been elected by us, right?
well, I think what you have is kind of a legislative duty that the State Elections Board is currently in charge of. And then you have an executive duty, what the Secretary of State is still in charge of, and that would not change.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Any other questions of, what number are you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem? 11, try now. 13, try now.
I know that the way the State Board of Elections and the State School Board are appointed are somewhat different, but I am familiar with the State School Board, and the State School Superintendent does not serve on the board. He handles the executive operations of the Department of Education, and then the board is a separate, has different duties, rulemaking and some of those sorts of things. And the state school superintendent is elected statewide. Thank you.
Further questions of Chairman Blackman on either one of those two bills that he's asked about? Any committee members? Okay. You will receive information. We will have a meeting tomorrow. We're in the process of securing a room, so you'll receive an invitation to that, but I would suspect that the time will be similar in the location. So is there anything further from the committee before we adjourn today? I think more like 3 o'clock. Yes, sir. 3 o'clock. Okay. Representative Douglas, you're number 2.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Are we going to add 2 more to that luxurious number 531? Are we going to add those 2 bills we just heard?
What kind of 531 is it? I want to make sure I got the adjective right. Luxurious.
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 Yes.
Quite. This is why I want you to ask any questions of Representative Blackman, Chairman Blackman, and the bills. And you have those. You have the one that was passed out to you, and you have the 2 bill numbers. I would suggest you study up on them.
Okay. So that still, are you going to add them to 531? That's what I was asking.
That'll be up to the committee.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Representative Burnell?
Just for clarification purposes, so these, 4 bills here, will they be a part of a 531 tomorrow, or we're going to discuss them tomorrow?
I know we will discuss them. Whether or not they'll be part of it will be up to the committee.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we will stand adjourned and you'll get notice about a meeting tomorrow. Thank you.